for the final wrap-up at 4:30 p.m. Over to you.
So this panel is all about income inequality. And before we begin, I want all of us to think about what happens around the world when we allow income inequality to grow unchecked. Income inequality in this world has been the driving force behind Brexit. It has been the driving force behind the results of the 2016 US presidential election, the Yellow Vest movement in France, the European migration crisis, and you see it in Africa in the form of civil unrest, terrorism. Around the world, you see it in the form of crime, of course. And my goal for this panel is really to make it clear that when there is income inequality in any given country, be it Nigeria or anywhere else, everybody's where the wealthy have all the opportunities and the poor have nothing. So I do want to start with Agboje Imukode, Chairman of the African Initiative for Governance. You know, we had a great debate backstage about this, but the point is that the top 5 highest earning Nigerians are worth about $25 to $30 billion, while millions of Nigerians are going hungry. If you could name 3 things that would solve that issue, what would they be?
Can you hear me? Thank you, Zain. 3 things. There are a bit more than 3, but I'll try to limit myself to your stated number. I think the first thing is, you said that there are 5 individuals that are worth $25 billion, sorry. The world tells us that there are about 2,000 billionaires, okay? And I think in the US you have 580 of them. In China you have certainly about 400 or more. In Nigeria, I think it says we have between 3 and 5 billionaires. And I think it's a sign that we actually, if it's anything, that there's a metaphor for the lack of competitiveness within our economy. The size of our economy today, we should have about 40 billionaires, but more importantly, we should learn from other competitive economies, and through, 50, 100, 200 billionaires, I think the size of our economy would significantly grow. And that's the fundamental premise of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, pushing for a competitive Nigerian economy. But then the next thing I will speak to is human capital development. Actually, when people say, what is your panacea for the challenges of Nigeria? I say it's all about human capital. Bill Clinton said it's about the economy is stupid, but I think it's actually about human capital in the sense of health and education and addressing, the quality of the Nigerian human being. The stronger the Nigerian human being is, the more competitive they are in any sphere of activity, whether it's for profit or not for profit. And of course, the results are going to be seen in our overall economic performance. Related to that, of course, to my mind, is the quality of governance. I think that there has been a significant dilution or erosion in the standards of human capital that we have in public governance in Nigeria. And if we don't address that, we're going to really be challenged. And I need to give 2 examples. The first is this. When I think about a university, and I think about a world-class university, and I've been to quite a few universities in my life, my one abiding memory, and nothing has shifted it, is when I visited the University of Ibadan as a 6-year-old with my mother. My mother was going to visit a friend who was doing a PhD. She's Tanzania, one of the most intelligent women I think the world has produced. But she chose to do her PhD at University of Ibadan. And I remember going to her room, postgraduate quarters. I remember going to the restaurant, in the University of Ibadan where everybody ate. I remember having to walk past the swimming pool, and I remember the diving boards. I can see heads nodding. And to me, I've been to universities all over the world, and there is no university environment that beats that. And that tells you, I will be revealing my age, but this is not that long ago. And the other one is this. When you think about the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, is the cultural, host for Great Britain. And in Nigeria, we borrowed a lot from the British. The Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation was the cultural bastion for Nigeria. And culture is very important in nation building. Now, I'll give you an example of the typical cultural officer that worked in the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation in the late 50s. Chino Achebe was just one of several. He wrote Things Fall Apart as a cultural officer in Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation. He wrote Arrows of God. He wrote great books that have been published in hundreds of millions of copies. That was the quality of human capital that worked for Nigeria then. And it is no wonder that we struggle today to do, even with much more money, much more resources, what they did 50, 60 years ago.
Thank you, Agboje. So, Mauricio, you obviously work for Nestle Nigeria. Agboje talked about bad governance as a problem. And if there is bad governance, of course, that needs to be rooted out, but it also might mean that the private sector really needs to step in. What incentives does the private sector need to step in and try to address income inequality in Nigeria?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think the reality is that at this stage, we don't need incentives because the situation is so difficult for all of us that we have to step in. As responsible citizens, and I'm talking corporate citizens, we have to step in. If we want prosperous business in the future, we have to help develop the nation. This is not a choice. And if we're only thinking of the top line and bottom line of this year, and we don't invest in the capacity going forward, then that means we will have no business. So, yes, there might be discussions on financial incentives that at this stage, I believe they're useless because the government needs those incentives to be placed in infrastructure. There are clear incentives that the private sector is looking for, and it's just clearly to be able to be part of the development of this nation. And I'm sure just to be able to and I think there's a lot of stories that a lot of the people in the private sector can share, is demanded by consumers and therefore by Nigerians. But today, I don't think there is not a consumer that doesn't see an economic development company and doesn't, in certain way, choose their products.
So if things are so bad that the private sector needs to step in, then why haven't they stepped in the way that they should have in order to address income inequality?
I think the private sectors, and there's a lot of examples, that have to step in, but the private sector alone cannot make the difference. And I think that's the reason we're here. We're here because it has to be a partnership between the government, between the NGOs and the private sectors. But in terms of examples, I can give you examples of Nestle and how we have today we purchase 100% of our maize. We purchase locally. We develop farmers, and I'm very happy to see that we have the deputy governor of Kaduna State because that's where we have most of our activities today. We do radio shows to be able to help them in terms of developments, best practice farming. I know that there's also the representative and the country director of USAID here who we partner with. That's another example how you can step in and make a difference. However, it is a job that needs to be done by all actors. And I think the big debate we had in the back is not that the reality is that you have people who are willing to put the resources, and I know that, for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are putting a lot of resources. You have a lot of companies that are wanting to do the difference. I know the World Bank also wants to do the difference. It's just how we make all of this work. And I think that's where the challenge is. I think the initiative is there. It's just how do we finally get together and make it happen.
Thank you. I want to bring in Shubham Chowdhury. He is the Nigeria Country Director for the World Bank. And I want to make it clear that he's only been on the job 3 weeks. So I'm going to try and make the questions as easy as possible, although we do want to get your input. Obviously, the World Bank offers a lot of zero interest loans, low interest loans to Nigeria, to the Nigerian government. How do you make sure that that money goes where it needs to go and actually makes a difference on the ground?
Thank you, Zain. So if you would allow me, let me just step back a bit. You know, you've posed the question in terms of how do we reduce income inequality. If I may just flip it to say, how do we promote shared prosperity? Okay? Because there's a difference. There's a way of reducing income inequality, which is leveling down. Okay?
Everybody gets poorer.
Everyone gets poorer.
We don't want that.
So you don't want that, right?
No.
And so the way we've defined it is really our twin goals are eliminate poverty and promote shared prosperity. So then you say, what does that mean? For me, it simply means, you know, how do you make lives better for the bottom half? You know, so it's everyone, their opportunities that the kids have, the kind of the living standards, everything is improves for the bottom half of the population. If for the bottom half it rises, you can be pretty sure for the top half.
But before you continue answering your question, is shared prosperity, I understand that shared prosperity is obviously important, and it's important that everybody gets to participate in Nigeria's wealth, but surely the gap between the rich and the poor is also a problem too. I mean, if people think that the system is rigged, if they think it's unfair, that can lead to crime, that can lead to people not playing by the rules. I mean, there are so many other consequences. The gap between the rich and the poor, even if everybody gets richer, the gap is still something worth focusing on, correct?
Absolutely, and that's where the distinction I would draw is between inequality in outcomes versus inequality in opportunity. I think what keeps people kind of feeling that, look, there's a sense that they, as long as they have an opportunity to, you know, strive, if they work hard, that they will enjoy the kind of life they'd hoped for, or that their kids will enjoy. That's the key. So I agree that inequality in outcomes do matter, that you don't want those to grow beyond, you know, bound, but it's really about, do people feel like they have a shot at making their lives better, that their children will have a better life? So coming back to your question in terms of what we do as the World Bank, it's really, you know, if you look at the global experience, to promote shared prosperity, to kind of provide that opportunity for everyone, it's really two simple things, right? And then you have to start peeling back the onion. The two simple things that you begin with are, no country has managed to become prosperous and provide equality of opportunity without investing in its people. And the second is creating the space for private businesses, small and large, to invest, create jobs, create the better jobs, the good jobs. So that's at a high level. So no country has managed to promote shared prosperity without doing these two fundamental things, but it's easier said than done, right? So then you have to start peeling back the onion in terms of, okay, in order to do that, in this particular country context, what do you need to get done? And here's where I'm going to put myself out on a limb, having been here a very relatively short time. In Nigeria, clearly one of the things is, how do we improve and help government invest in Nigerian children, youth, women, the levels of human capital in Nigeria. I mean, that's where I see the starkest inequality. Okay, you have people like Chinua Achebe and others who are, you know, who are on the global stage, right? And then you have poor families, kids in various remote parts of Nigeria who don't have a chance to go to school. You have out-of-school children. I think Nigeria has among the largest number, over 10 million. Okay, so how do we help government? And our purpose here is to help the Nigerian government do that, you know, invest in youth, children, women. We provide financing, yes, but actually more important than financing is really working on how do you deliver that financing through programs that are robust. Part of this is the delivery systems within government, both at the federal, but especially at the state level, okay? And part of it is really bringing different parts of government together, okay? It's not just the Ministry of Education or the Department of Education that will do it. It's, you have to ensure that, say, the parents can actually afford or have an incentive to send their kids to school. So that may mean having some sort of social safety net.
Right, but part of the issue when it comes to income inequality, obviously, is corruption and people not feeling that the government is transparent enough. When it comes to organizations like the World Bank giving these loans to Nigeria, is there a way to actually verify, to make sure that that money is going to those at the bottom who need it?
That is what we spend most of our time trying to ensure. Okay, I mean, every program that we finance, basically these are developed jointly with government partners, with other stakeholders. We try to be very clear on, look, what is this money intended for? Okay, with very clear results. If it's about keeping teenage girls in school, okay, very clear results that we would be able to monitor, we would help government monitor. Then we have basically all kinds of policies and procedures to ensure that the fiduciary aspects of this are as robust as possible. Social and environmental safeguards as well, right? So we work through government. So part of it is us working to help our government partners ensure that the value for money is realized, that the money goes to its intended uses. Part of that also leads us to focusing on how do we strengthen government systems for doing this, not just for our programs, but throughout, right?
Yep.
For Nigeria's overall budget. So that means investing in strengthening procurement capacity, financial management capacity. I think we were discussing earlier, e-procurement systems, so that things are done online, which are more transparent. Encouraging our partners at the state level to be transparent about their budgets.
Right,
okay,
right.
Things
right.
like that.
Abimbola. Okay, thank you. So Abimbola, you work with the National Population Commission. Your role as chairwoman is to organize data. If, for example, the World Bank decides to spend money and give Nigeria loans and their goal is to, I don't know, send more girls back to school in rural areas, for example, how can the data that you work with every single day, tell us whether that goal is actually being achieved?
Well, thank you very much. I was actually, just as he was speaking, my mind was going to data as well. What everybody here should know is that Nigeria is a big country. And we have huge private sector, both formal and informal, and we also have the government. But whatever we would do to promote the lives of the people of this country, to give better lives, to have shared prosperity, must be based on empirical evidence. Governance must be run as evidence-based. And data is the only evidence to show where the money goes to. We must know the demographic profile of the people. He spoke about, for example, young girls in school. How many young girls do we have out of school? How many do we have in school? That's where we come in, we provide the data. We give World Bank the data of these are the children that were born this year. They should be in school in the next 2, 3, 4 years. They should be in primary school. Another 6 years, they should be in secondary school. This is how government should plan. By using our data, we have both the foundational and the secondary data. The foundational is how many people were born, where are they, in the rural areas, in the urban cities. Then the government will be able to plan based on this data and make policies and formulations until Nigeria begins to work to ensure that data and population and development activities are intentionally part of our policy making. By making use of all data, we will not get anywhere. It's like we're beating our fists in the air. We will know what to do with the money given to us, and there will be no way for them to, for even World Bank to monitor. Because if World Bank gives us 10 naira today, you don't know how many children we want to use that for. We should be able to produce data to tell World Bank we will need 10 naira for 10 students. And then World Bank can monitor and say, okay, then the private sector, which is very important and key, can come in and say, okay, we'll take 2 children, we'll do this for them. Without data, no nation can succeed.
Thank you, Abimbola.
Thank you.
So Paula, who is the Nigerian country director for the Gates Foundation. You know, in America, the billionaires in that country, I have to say, not all of them, but some of them really do step up when it comes to trying to make the world a better place. Warren Buffett stands up all the time voluntarily raises his hand and says, I should pay more in taxes. There's no reason why my secretary should be paying higher taxes than me. We all know what the Gates Foundation does for the world. I mean, their goal really is the greater good and make positive changes when it comes to eradicating poverty, polio, that sort of thing. When you look at Nigeria's billionaires, I would say actually that a lot of them are doing wonderful things for this country. But what I want to know is it actually their moral responsibility to do so? Every person that becomes a billionaire in Nigeria in 5 years or 10 years from now, is it their moral responsibility to make sure that Nigeria is better off 50 years from now than it is today?
Not easy to go last. This is not an easy question. Thank you very much, Asha, and thank you very much for the NESG for this wonderful opportunity. It's just great to be back. Last year we were here. I was just going through my notes to see kind of like what are the recommendations from last year. It will be important to see where we go. I think you are raising an amazing question. When you look at the level of inequality in the world, it's quite mind-blowing. And especially in Nigeria, let me just share some data that the Gates Foundation shared 2 weeks ago in New York when we published the Goalkeeper report. I will really ask all of you to read the report because, for the first time, this is the role that the private philanthropy should play, and also private Nigerian are also playing that role of really being a independent broker to provide some public good in terms of data that are not politically oriented to really inform the economic discourse, right? So we published some very important data on inequality in the world, but specifically on Nigeria. For the first time, working with IHME, the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation in the US, we were able to estimate under 5 mortality in each of the LGAs in Nigeria. And then when we look at that, and also we're able to estimate the mean year of schooling for each LGA in Nigeria. When you look at the inequality across states, it's mind-blowing. You cannot imagine that, an LGA in Jigawa, if you go to Garki in Jigawa, for example, the level of mortality is 3 times than an LGA in Ekiti State, in Ado Ekiti State, for example. When you look at the year of schooling, for example, kids in Ekiti State have 7 years mean more year of schooling than a kid in the north, right? So it means that there are a lot of roles, an important role that the private sector can play so that we can all help the government, because to solve for that, you need many players, right? So definitely the government has an important role to play because it's the sole responsibility of the government to deliver for the people. The private sector has an amazing role to play because you need the market, right? We have the development partners, etc. But now the role of the billionaire that we have, it's so critical. The Gates Foundation works very, very closely with many of them, including Aliko Dangote, for example. We have a very strong partnership with the Aliko Dangote Foundation, where we work with many, many states, including the Kaduna State, for example, because only the private sector, only philanthropists can take risks that some other people cannot take. Because we commit, for example, to put our money directly into the state government, so that the state government can also commit money, etc. I think if collectively they can continue to play that role, it will be amazing. I know IEC, for example, with others, are doing an amazing work to really bring the Global Citizen Concert to talk about human capital development next year here. So this is something which will be really important for Nigeria to raise more money for human capital development. So I will say definitely yes. Even all ourselves that are here, I'll just try to do something here. Who pays for school for someone who's not from his own family? So, yeah, so including all of us. So you see, we are all philanthropists. In Africa, we give back. We all send money electronically. We pay for school fees. When you have more money, you have that responsibility to give back. Because, Bill and Melinda have decided that they're going to give 96 or 7% of their wealth. And I don't know if many people know this, and they're trying to solve problem of today. Because the Gates Foundation will close 20 years after the last of 2 of them died. Because they want really to take big issues like polio eradication, primary health care, solving sanitation, solving energy, so that they can solve the problems. So the billionaire of Nigeria, today problems in Nigeria, it's also their problem. They have a huge social moral responsibility to pay back.
Thank you, Paul. I actually loved what you said because it really showed me that actually, while it is partly the responsibility of the wealthy, we can all really make a difference in a small way. You know, my mom runs a school in Enugu, and that's how I help other children get an education in this country, because she runs that school. That's my vehicle. But really, everybody in this hall has the capacity in some tiny way to make life better for another Nigerian. So you're right. We can't put it all on the billionaires. We also, every one of us has to step up as well. So I really appreciate that point. I thought that was great. Agboje, one of the things that you and I talked about is the difference between what income inequality means in the West and what it means in Nigeria. In a typical sort of Western society, you might have, I don't know, a few thousand people at the top, and then a large chunk of the country in the middle, and then obviously several million at the bottom. In Nigeria, you have 10 people at the top, and then 150 million people who are struggling. Tell me why trickle-down economics would never work in this country.
First of all, I think I should explain why we have so few at the top. The survival, or rather, let me put it, because it's actually the mortality rate of an entrepreneur or a business person in Nigeria, I think is higher than most environments. Indeed, it was, I think, Aliko who cracked a joke that a few people came to heaven, some men and women, and they opened the doors of heaven to them. And those who were waiting in the queue said to God, "Why did you allow these people?" And he said, "These are Nigerian entrepreneurs, so they've already seen hell." You see, there are two qualities that you require to build wealth. One is domain expertise. So you must master or understand a sector or a profession or an activity. And the other is what I call, block and tackling, which is simply navigating an environment and making your business thrive. You see, in our system, the block and tackling activity is overwhelming. And so if I'm a hairdresser and I'm very talented and I could probably roll out a franchise of hairdressing salons across Nigeria, okay? The problem is that I have to be a security expert to make sure that my business is not robbed. I have to be a power generation expert. I have to be a local council and tax, and so you have to be this statesman. How many business people across the world have to be a statesman to succeed, or stateswoman? And that's the problem. And that's essentially what the Economic Summit Group realized 25 years ago and said, look, this thing must stop. If we're creating barriers to succeeding in business that don't exist in any other part of the world, Nigeria will be an uncompetitive environment, and therefore our economy cannot grow. But then to the issue of why things are not trickling down. The type of policy making and policy implementation that is required to fix and address Nigeria's structural problems requires the very best of us. I would make this strongly that the public sector demands the very best of Nigerian talent. And right now, the public sector is not getting the very best of Nigerian talent. And let me explain. You have 200 million consumers, right? Now, Coke gets to my village and is drunk at a price point that makes sense. But medicine can't get to the primary health care center in my village. Why? The Nigerian NIMSI, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but I know they are meant to aggregate identity information. They came to us as bankers when I used to be a banker, and they said, give us money to do identity management or whatever it is. And we said, how many identities have you captured? And they told us hundreds of thousands. We said, in what period of time? They said several years. So in several years, you've captured hundreds of thousands. We said we won't give you money. But you know what we will try and do? Let's come together as banks and let's try and create our own understanding of an identity management system. That's BVN. And at this point in time, 45 million Nigerians after 5 years are registered. What am I saying? I'm saying that if the same type of people and talent that existed in the banking industry was in NIMSI, we will have 200 million Nigerians, counted today. So the systems to bring inclusion are beyond the capacity of those in government today. Can it be done? Of course it can be done. We do it every day in the private sector. How do we bring, one of the most important risks in Nigerian banking today is that over the past 10 years, we have shifted from a cash-based system, a check-based system of settlements, to an electronic-based system of settlements. So if you are looking at operation, it's not a negative thing, but today, trillions of naira are transacted by tens of millions of people, which was not the case a few years ago. So are you telling me that we can't create a virtual identity to capture 200 million Nigerians? It was the man that was selling us technology from Infosys. He sold technology to all the banks in Nigeria, made billions, and then went and contributed to his own country and created this other system where 1.1 billion Indians are now covered by virtual identities after 10 years. Of course we can do it. So my point is simply this. Do we have challenges? Yes, we do. My pain is that in 10 to 20 years, we can lick those challenges if we get the talent where it's needed most.
Thank you. Mauricio, I know that Nestle, for example, does try to do its part. Nestle in some parts of the world are a controversial company, but at least in Nigeria, they have tried to do their part when it comes to partnering with local farmers, trying to make sure that they don't rely on imports for certain ingredients, that sort of thing. What more do you think Nestle should be doing?
Look, I think one of the most important parts to be able to help in the development is capacity building. I think over the last 2 days, I keep on hearing one thing, and it's education, education, education. And one of the best ways that we can help this, and I want to take it a step further, that is not only about education, it's about capacity building. Because sometimes when you take it to education, you're thinking about schools, you're thinking about university, but it goes beyond this. It goes to examples of how you can train a farmer to have better practices in farming and suddenly double his income just because he's not losing money on waste or because he doesn't have aflatoxin. So it's amazing how the entrepreneurship that you find in Nigeria can be properly directed with capacity building. The same goes for people that we take. We do have 2 technical training centers where we train people that not necessarily are going to work in Nestle, but can work in any company. It's kind of 2 internal Nestle schools. And once again, once you build those capacities, you have amazing people that can do the difference. So from a Nestle perspective is how do we continuously provide that capacity in our areas of expertise? We talk a lot about the capabilities of government is how together we can help to build those capabilities. And I think Nestle can play a very important role, not only Nestle, but all the private sectors. And I think examples of how the private sector has driven the certain initiatives, as some of the ones that have been put today, is exactly where private sector can help and is all around that capacity building.
Thank you. Okay. Actually, I've just been told that we would love to open up the floor to the audience. Does anyone on the floor have any questions for my panel? And if not, we do have a question. Gentleman right there. Thank you. Please stand.
My name is Benga Odusonya, and I work for Cool Synergy and IPP. We are building a 255 in Ijebode infrastructure. But my question goes to Igboje. He made a comment now, because I remember years back, we were on the same street in July, and I went to him and said, I need some funding. And he said the same thing. He said, give me the document now. I said, Igboje, what document am I going to give you? He said, what would I work on? So I know him, that is the premise he works on. But my question is that, I know him, and I see him with all these people. You've made a comment now. Why are you not telling them that you need all this capacity building? Because when Jonathan was there, you were very close to him. So, I mean, we don't need a messiah to do this, if you are the one that can do it. Because recently, again, I was in England, and I saw you with the head of service trying to, on an AIG. So I think, you can do this as well. So that what you have just said, what you have just said can be implemented, you know. And that's my point. I don't know. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Gbenga, if there's ever a time I've been put on the spot, it's this time. But I think you've spoken from your heart, and therefore you deserve an extremely transparent answer from me. You see, I feel that the real issue in Nigeria today is one of collective action. And I'll go further. You see, one Igboje is not going to do it, or one Asoe Igodalo, or one Zain Asha, okay? It's going to require collective action for us to move as a group, create a movement to take this country to the level that it deserves to be. If ever there was an example of that type of process, I think the Nigerian Economic Summit group example for me is evidence that it can be done. But the thing is that in 25 years, our nation has grown a lot more complex, a lot larger, and perhaps whilst we still retain the Economic Summit group model, I think we might have to be a bit more provocative in terms of how we approach things. And then, of course, the Economic Summit Group was built at a time of dictatorship. This is a time of civilian democracy. And so we can take greater chances and liberties, I think. Now, I want us to do a project together. And I want us to show what Nigeria can be when we work together. I'm convincing thousands of Nigerians to join me, and let us affect primary health care in Nigeria in a way it has not been affected before. We have 774 local government areas. Each of us comes from a local government area. The reason why, infant mortality is where it is today, and that the childbirth in many of our, in fact, childbirth in Nigeria is a nightmare. Nigeria is one of the 4th deadliest places to go and have a child, okay? It's because at that primary health care center, they can't, there's no maternal care, and when it's done very badly. Let us create in each local government a place of refuge, a place of trust, where our people can go and they will get medicine and they will be treated. And I'm not talking about heart surgery and so on, but the basic things that affect us and give us the statistics that make us look bad. And each healthcare center costs just 30 million naira. Just 30 million naira for the front-end investments. And then, don't worry, we will create a central group who will work on the supply chains. And these things can be done. We will work with the likes of Nestle, with the likes of Coca-Cola, to understand how they get Coke to my local government at that price point, and get medicine to the local government at that price point. And we will, by the way, understand also that today, 50% of healthcare actually comes from the pockets of Nigerians. So it's not that we can't pay, they pay. It's just that what they pay for, right, because the system is not in the hands of people with capacity, right, is very poor medical care. Let's do it together. And I'm not talking about just the 3 billionaires, which I'm not one of. I'm talking about the thousands of Nigerians, okay, who can afford this. If it's not one local government that one healthcare you want to take, band together as 10. Now, we don't just need money. More importantly, we need governance and accountability. And I don't want you to go to your village every time. But if you take that healthcare center and we give you reporting format, data collection systems, you can make sure it works all the time. Let's do this together. Let's show that Nigeria can work. And then perhaps we take this to primary education and continue building a great nation. Let's do it together. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes. Good afternoon.
Okay.
My name is Zeal Akare. I work with Graham Black Advisory. My question is for Mrs. Abimbola regarding data. I spent a couple of months gathering data from the Population Commission, from NBS, the BVN database, NABES, as much credible data as I could get. I was looking for a correlation between different data points and our population. Then I found an interesting anomaly where we have a workforce data where the workforce in Nigeria is 16 to 65. And our PVC is 18 and above. The population above 65 is less than 0.7%. Now, I found the anomaly that in 14 states in Nigeria, we have a higher PVC registration than workforce. And that is technically a statistical impossibility, and it occurs in 14 different states. So the question is this: regarding population, regarding data, you've discussed how important data is for planning. What are we doing about getting credible data across the country?
Very much for the question. I think you have just posed the question for the day, because really, if you can get an answer to that, we'll get answer to our problems of inequalities in income and all that. Thank you. Data actually is life, and it is the oxygen that every country breathes to stay alive. What you have just narrated here is part of the problems we have in data collating and collection. And it is also because we want to be honest, we are Nigerians, we want a better Nigeria. The National Population Commission believes that everything about a nation is the population. We are all part of the population, that's why we are here. The NESG can put up this because population would listen. If there's no human being, there's no nation. So we are that passionate. The problem is the National Population Commission would need the collaboration of private sectors to help us with technology so that we can have proper and accurate data that will satisfy everyone's needs and make our country to grow. The truth is, we have a lot of our data are not technology-based yet. This is a truth. But I want to assure you that we have been able to discuss at relevant quarters, and they're ready to come to our aid. But having come to NESG today, NES today, I'm appealing to companies like Nestle, the World Bank, even Ike and everybody here, to please come to our aid so that the kind of thing you're talking about will no longer happen. It is an anomaly, and I admit it. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, Pauline wants to jump in the conversation.
Sorry, can I ask one?
His mic's not on.
Thank you very much. No, just wanted to add one quick point on this, because one of the success of the Nigerian government on data has been the use of data for polio eradication. I'm sure you follow that. In the past, for the past 3 years, there has not been any case of wild polio viruses, right? And this has been because of really use of data. I'm not sure you've heard about the Grade 3 data. So it has been funded by the Nigerian government, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and DFID. And this is a geo-reference infrastructure for data for development, where we've been able to really, use geospatial data, because it's just difficult to go and count every Nigerian, but at least using georeference, you can estimate number of people based on the settlement, and they've been using that. The NPHCD has been using that data to really eradicate polio in Nigeria. And then after finishing the job on polio now, we've also continued that support to even georeference all the states, even in the south. And now there is a secretariat in the Ministry of Finance and Budget and Planning, which is hosting that secretariat. It's called Grid 3, open source, available for everyone to use, where all settlements are mapped, schools are mapped, etc. But just how do we disseminate to make sure that Nigeria can use that data for planning purposes?
Thank you. Did you want to jump back in? Okay.
Thank you. I would also appreciate Bill and Melinda Gates. But I'd also like us to know that it's not that dark. We also use the GIS. We take data at disaggregated levels in the local government, but we haven't finished everything. That's what we call the enumeration area demarcation. By the time this kind of data are concluded, this kind of anomalies would have been corrected, but we're just in a process. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm here with the mic.
I've got the mic here as well.
Okay.
So ladies first. Yes.
Okay.
My question essentially goes to Ike as well. I think we all know, generally speaking, that we need the countries that have done particularly well have benefited, like you said, from having their best in the public sector. And so we all know that. But really, the reality, there are certain things that are on ground. In reality, what mechanisms do we have to ensure that the best come into the public sector, the best are promoted within the public sector, and the best are actually protected within the public sector? It's a very important question, because we all know the theory, but the reality is on ground. And how many of us are ready to actually force that mechanism? That's my question. Thank you.
Simple.
Sector myself, so.
The answer is simple. And first of all, I've studied the problem, as you know, at a very granular level. And we have professed reforms that are necessary. And by the way, the reforms are not anything different from what New Zealand has done, Singapore has done, UK. So there's no rocket science in it, okay? Now, what people speak about is the will, all right? Now, in most cases, I've found that when you are reforming yourself, in other words, when government is reforming itself, as opposed to reforming the nation, okay, to rely on their own will alone as the means or the oxygen to finalize the reform process is not. So you need an external force. And that external force is in this room. By the way, in terms of the Constitution of the Republic, and in terms of the political economies that we've studied all the way, there is a responsibility that the private sector elite carry. And that is what Zain has been pointing out. And that responsibility is to make government accountable. Accountable in a very granular way, and in a way that the man who votes only gets done every 4 years or 5 years. Okay? So we, the Economic Summit Group, take that document that the government has come up with, the reform document that makes sense, compel them to implement that document that they came up with. If they do, things will change. So let us take that document, and I believe that has been shared with one of our commissions in the Economic Summit Group, and make sure that the document contains the following things: that the government should create an elite group of 200 of the best, a pool available that is in working for the Nigerian government, available to do these type of things, okay? Why haven't we done it? That is one of them. Another is that there should be a formal secondment policy and institutionalization of this current fragmented haphazard. If I goes to government now, because I have many friends here, he will have 40 special advisors. Meantime, other ministries don't have. Whereby, as opposed to self-interest driving the process by which the private sector intervenes, and we do make some progress for our companies, but the economy in itself doesn't make progress, the whole nation moves forward. Take that document, that reform document that has been approved by the Federal Executive Council, that has been signed off by this government, and make sure it's implemented.
Okay.
I think we have one more question, I believe.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Rume Ogane. I'm from Delta. I represent the Marketplace Nigeria, an ecosystem that gathers entrepreneurs made in Nigerian technology and products. We have been doing this for 4 years. Now, our madam from the Population Commission talked something about technology, that we don't have technologies. Now, my question is this. I have been working with made in Nigerian entrepreneurs for the last 4 years. Innovations from different categories. Why is it difficult for government and public sectors, even the private sector, to invest into our universities. Because we find out that in foreign countries, developed countries, these big manufacturing companies, they invest into research in these universities to be able to develop technology that the nation can use and at the same time can spread. Because at the end of the day, we spend so much importing technology, and at the same time, our local technology do not have that competitive advantage and don't have capacity to grow. So what can the World Bank do to help that platform? How can the Population Commission come in to make sure that we use our own indigenous technology? That's the only way we can take Nigeria to 2050, and if we decide to shift gears, that's the direction forward. So how can this be done? Thank you.
Professor, do you want to start with that?
Hello, yeah. So in fact, at the World Bank, we have been working with the government on a variety of programs to precisely strengthen both the post-secondary education and help youth with the training and the skills that are needed to succeed in the marketplace. But also, we've just begun work on addressing this issue of how do you realize lay the foundations for the digital economy. A big part of innovation now is going to be in the digital space. So the idea is, Nigeria already has entrepreneurs like yourself who are already in this space. How can we actually help strengthen that? As I mentioned earlier, we work through government. So it's really trying to figure out how can government help create the space. Ultimately, it's going to rest with entrepreneurs like yourself. But the role of government should be to enable, create a level playing field, offer you with the kind of support you need, but it's not something that government should be doing directly, right? So we have in tertiary education, in basically in the whole area of youth skills training, and as well as on the digital front, there are programs that we're working with government to try and with obviously the inputs from the broader community of private sector and other stakeholders.
And Abimbola, do you want to pick up?
So, it's an opportunity to let the cat out of the bag, but in terms of technology, we've had great assistance from UNICEF in the birth registration area. Birth registration now is automated. You can always check how many children are born in your state. I could give you the link later. That's that. The other one is that we are planning towards the next census. And we've made some studies of some countries. And the National Population Commission is putting up a report now that the next census would use local technology. Usually, the past censuses had not been technology-based. This one is going to be, and we want to copy that of Kenya, because the one Kenya just had a few weeks ago, all the technology that was used in Kenya for their census were produced by the youths of Kenya. That, to me, is great for Africa. And we have also decided in our report to Mr. President that we should encourage the production of the same thing. We should replicate that in Nigeria so that we can provide employment for the teeming youths. I'm sure we all know that Nigeria has a youth bulge. We have a lot of young people. 63 to 70% of Nigeria's population is youth, and they need to be gainfully engaged. A National Population Commission is taking that now to engage the youth and make sure that the federal government would probably have universities together, that the youth will be trained to produce this PDAs would use for the next census. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody on this panel. I think we can all agree it is about not just shared prosperity, but also shared responsibility, everybody getting involved. I'm still going to think about the fact that it's not just about my question to you about, what do the billionaires have to do? It's what all of us can have to do. And it's just as much as my responsibility as it is Elumelu or Dangote. It's everybody's responsibility to make sure that those at the bottom of the ladder can move up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining this panel. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you very much. I'd like to quickly invite the chairman to please join us right here on stage. So while the photograph is on and we actually delivered exactly 2:30 now, we'll go for the lunch sessions. You have your lunch at the venue of the sessions. It's actually a breakout session. And let all be seated here at 4:30 p.m. for the summit closing. And then at 7:30, we'll have the 25th anniversary soiree right here. Comedians, music, culture, all of that, 7:30 p.m. But right now, enjoy your lunch, enjoy your deliberations. Be back here at 4:30. It's all in the program. Yes, it's here. Yes.